I'm the Director of Advocacy and Operations at JRS. I've been with JRS for almost 2 years, and I know a few of you through our interactions with Jesuit institutions around the country. What I wanted to do with this presentation today was first to give a bit of an overview of the global refugee crisis. I think either your interest or concern for these issues probably brought you to the webinar, either if you're seeing scenes of refugees on the news and the media, or it's an issue, a topic that's come up if you're in a school setting specifically or within your community that is being addressed by your peers or by your community. So I wanted to make sure that you have just a few statistics and information about what's currently happening around the world. And then if you're not familiar with JRS, I just have a few slides on who we are and what we do and how we're working to address the global refugee crisis. And then I'll spend the majority of the time talking through step by step what it would take to host a refugee simulation, what it entails, what it looks like, and also to give you some examples of other groups that have hosted simulations and how that has taken root. So let me just start. Try to start. It looks like maybe it's frozen. There we go. Had it up for a little too long. So just to quickly again give you a sense of where we are with the global refugee crisis. So right now, today, the world is witnessing the highest numbers of global displacement since World War II. So compared to the numbers of individuals and families who were displaced primarily in Europe after World War II, we are seeing record numbers compared to that time. And there are several reasons for this: increasing number of conflicts around the globe, the inability of the global community to really address those crises in an effective way, and then crises lasting longer, where we're seeing not only are there new crises that are coming up, but crises that have lasted decades, and individuals have found themselves in a displaced setting, uprooted from their homes for decades. So we are seeing generations of people growing up as refugees. So for all of those reasons, the numbers have really skyrocketed over recent years. And what that looks like is right now we have about 65.3 million people who are displaced from their homes. And if we break that down, about 40 million of them are internally displaced, meaning they haven't had to leave their actual country yet. They haven't crossed borders, but they have had to leave their home, their community, their village, their city, and move to another part of their country to find safety and security. 21 million are refugees. They've had to leave their home. They've crossed borders and have been given refugee status by the United Nations, the global institution that grants that status. And then about 3 million asylum seekers, so individuals who have crossed borders but are still waiting for that official designation of a refugee, so they're seeking asylum. They're in the process of seeking asylum. So that brings us to the 65 million number. Now, to break that down a bit further, to give you a sense of what that means, that equals about 1 in every 113 people globally. So very much a number that we can sort of digest a bit more and how that would impact ourselves and our neighbors. And that children make up about 51% of the world's refugees. So in talking about the most vulnerable people that are being impacted by war and conflict and persecution around the world, children absolutely are part of that puzzle. Now, JRS, again, some of you might be familiar with us, but for those of you who aren't, we were founded 36 years ago in 1980 by Father Pedro Arrupe, who was then the Superior General of the Jesuits. And during that time, there were thousands of Vietnamese boat people who were fleeing Vietnam, looking for safety and security. And he saw this taking place and put a call out to his fellow Jesuits to respond. And that took a variety of forms, but predominantly what came of that call to action was the formation of Jesuit Refugee Service, now an independent 501c3 non-governmental organization. So today what that looks like is we are operating in 47 different countries. So this map gives you a sense of where we are around the globe. Of those 47 countries, we have 10 regional offices, and our office here in Washington, D.C. is one of those regional offices. It's our North America regional office. Globally then, we serve about 700,000 refugees any given year. And what do we do in terms of our service to refugees? I wanted to just give you a snapshot of what our programming looks like. This is actually a picture from a program that we run in Chad, a country that hosts about 400,000 refugees, primarily from the Darfur region of Sudan. It's actually our biggest education program in the world. But as many of you know, if you're from a Jesuit school, JRS, like other Jesuit institutions, is rooted in the Jesuit tradition of educating young people. So we really consider education to be both a basic human right and a life-saving intervention. So when we're talking about these humanitarian contexts, these humanitarian scenarios, it's absolutely critical to deliver water, food, shelter to those who are in need. But we really value education alongside those interventions, acknowledging the importance of educating a young generation for future generations, in particular, if we're talking about rebuilding countries that have suffered conflict and war. So that's the basic tenet of the organization. And the way that manifests itself is that education is the primary focus of our programming. So we coordinate programs from pre-primary through higher ed throughout the world, and also have some vocational skills building training, language training, teacher training alongside that. In addition, in certain areas of the world, we have counseling programs. We place an emphasis on caring for people with disabilities, including in an educational context. In some places, we offer healthcare programming, and we also offer emergency relief, primarily today in Syria, which, as we all know, is dealing with a significant crisis. And so emergency relief has been our primary focus within Syria. Now, given all of that, what can we here in the U.S. do to address these issues? And again, this is part and parcel of our work with Jesuit institutions here in the U.S. We're trying to spread the word about the work that we do in a variety of ways, and we get requests all the time from individuals who want to support the work in a hands-on way. So absolutely donating to the work, supporting the work financially is critical, but we understand that, especially in a school context, in a community context, individuals and communities want to really feel like they are learning about the situation, have a better grasp of the issues, and can contribute in a concrete way. So this slide just tells you a little bit about what we call our JRS action teams, which are basically individuals or groups around the U.S. who raise awareness about our mission in a variety of ways. So generally, supporting our work through both advocacy and fundraising. So we do have some student groups, for example, who started a JRS action team on campus, or an existing group on campus that has taken JRS or the refugee issue on as a campaign for their work. So there are a variety of ways that we work with groups and really tailor it depending on the group itself and their needs and their interests. But the Walk a Mile in My Shoes refugee simulation is one way that we offer, again, for groups to take a more hands-on approach. And again, learning more about the refugee issue and taking action. So over the past several months, we've refined our work around the simulation and are presenting it in a way to make it more accessible to schools in particular and other groups to host a simulation in their community. So what does a simulation look like? So again, the idea behind the simulation is that it offers an opportunity to raise awareness, to conduct advocacy, and in some cases, it's optional to fundraise on behalf of refugees and specifically JRS programs. But really what it is, it allows communities to pause, to take time out of their day, and to put themselves in the shoes of a refugee, hence the name we gave to this effort, Walk a Mile in My Shoes. So to really try to digest the frustrations, the disappointments, and the hopes that refugees around the world face. What it looks like tangibly is really a structured event where individuals or students or groups and their guests assume the role of refugees and act out some typical activities that a refugee experiences. So you'll see in this picture, this gives you a sense of what a simulation looks like, and I'll show some more pictures and actually a brief video at the end as well, so you can see what this feels like and looks like. But basically, it's an event that a group can host, carried out either in a common area or a room, a dedicated room, where several stations, 7 different stations are set up, and then participants walk through the simulation. And on average, it really varies depending on the organizers and the layout and the participants themselves, but generally, for a participant to walk through the simulation, it could range from about 10 to 20 minutes to complete the entire simulation. We hosted one here in our office over the summer for a group of high school students, and it actually lasted a couple of hours because the students really took their time at each station, and a robust conversation transpired at each station, and then they did a bit of a reflection afterwards. So it could take that form. Some groups have augmented the simulation by hosting a brief panel discussion before or afterwards, so that attendees could hear the discussion during the panel and then walk through the simulation. So it can take a variety of forms, really, again, whatever works for your context. But again, the idea is that it's an opportunity to share information about the challenges that refugees are facing and some of the issues that are part of this conversation around the global refugee crisis, and give individuals an opportunity to both experience it, talk about it, and take some actions. So the stations that I mentioned, and again, these 2 pictures, these are actually both from Fairfield University. I'm highlighting both Fairfield University in this presentation and the University of Scranton. They've become our experts in hosting simulations. Each of them has hosted 2 simulations over the past 12 months or so, and are planning to host additional ones this current semester. So on average, about every semester, they're hosting a simulation on campus. So you get a sense of what it looks like. But basically, the stations are 7 in total. The first one is a border station, which you'll see on the right side of your screen, and this is an opportunity for the attendee to arrive at, again, entry or border, if they're crossing a border, as a refugee would, and they receive an identity card. And I'll show you an example of what that identity card looks like later. They take their card and they move on to the next station, which would be shelter. During the shelter station, they will learn what it looks like, what it might feel like to live in a refugee camp, for example, what kind of space a refugee is allotted. Or if a refugee is living in an urban setting, which today, in today's context, the majority of refugees actually do live outside of camps. They don't live in formal refugee camps. So this is an opportunity to learn more about what kind of shelter is afforded a refugee, what are some of the challenges a refugee faces in terms of finding shelter for themselves and their family, and so on, with a food station, a water station, one focused on medical and health, what kind of health services a refugee typically is afforded. An education station, again, this is a focal point for JRS's work, so we want to share some information about access to education for refugees and how challenging that is. Just to give you a sense, today only about 50% of refugees have access to primary school, so elementary school. About a quarter have access to secondary education, higher ed, and very few, less than 1%, have access to either preschool, pre-primary, or higher ed. So those are some of the types of statistics and figures that we share during the education station. And then the final station is an advocacy station where we give attendees the opportunity to take an action by sending a letter to their member of Congress on a specific issue, and I'll share more about that. So in terms of preparing these various stations, the planning group would spend some time, in the days, weeks ahead of the event itself to learn more about each of the issues, and this is a great opportunity for students in particular. I know a lot of teachers, faculty appreciate giving their students this opportunity to learn more about these issues in a very hands-on way by preparing to host one of the stations. So ahead of the event itself, students read up on the issues, prepare how they'd like to present the station itself, and then the day of the event, they man the station and are the ones who are describing the issue to the attendees as they make their way to each of the stations. So again, taking a very hands-on approach, both from an organizer's point of view in terms of what the organizer gets out of the event, and then also, of course, the conversation that ensues between the person, the organizer hosting the station, and the attendee as they stop by to learn more about that issue. So that carries forth the interactive component of the event. Now, here's just a couple more pictures. These are students from the University of Scranton. The photo on the left is of a shelter station, so you can see they sort of developed this mock tent, if you will, and we marked out how much space in technical UN terms a refugee is allotted. So they get a sense of how uncomfortable, how cramped that space is, in particular if you're thinking of a family that's sharing that limited space. And then the second photo on the right is of the water station. In some circumstances, in some contexts, refugees have to, find water in creative ways or travel distances to find water. The amount of resources that are available to them in both camp settings and urban settings can be severely constrained. So this, again, allows the participants to just feel that and experience that for themselves. A couple more photos. The photo on the left, the food station, what we suggest is a comparison between a typical, American or student meal. If it's a lunch, for example, and you can see in the photo that's a standard sort of college lunch right there, compared to a food ration, for example, that a refugee would be given by the United Nations. So, so having to see the discrepancy between what we in many ways take for granted versus what refugees are struggling with on a day-to-day basis. And then the picture on the right is an advocacy station. So you'll see these students set up laptops that took them to our website where they send a letter to their member of Congress. And this is also an opportunity to have materials available so that participants can take those home with them. Now, in terms of resources and what JRS offers to those who are planning a refugee simulation, the photo on the right is our toolkit. I mentioned that over the past few months, we made a concerted effort to consolidate some of this information and present it in a way that's helpful to our supporters who are interested in hosting this kind of event. So this is a new toolkit that we have available, and we'll share it to all participants after the webinar today. But the toolkit includes basically a step-by-step guide on how to host a simulation. We also, as JRS staff, once we know that you're interested in hosting a simulation or have one scheduled, we will send you a document that has identity cards, and I'll show you again what that looks like. We'll also have available on our website actually as a downloadable file posters, basically signage for each of the stations. Again, the advocacy actions, so our website has updated advocacy actions. And then we'll also send you any other JRS materials that you might be interested in, our newsletters, our annual reports, fact sheets, timely, up-to-date information. And again, the toolkit itself includes step-by-step guides, a description for each of the stations that I mentioned. We also have a media outreach tip page, including a sample press release. We've actually had a fair amount of success with some of the schools gaining some media interest in their event, and that's the clip I'll show you in a couple of minutes as a news story for Fairfield. We also have a Q&A and a fact sheet in the toolkit, so that's where you can get your information about the refugee crisis, some key statistics. Certainly you can do your own research as well, but it's a starting point in terms of being able to use some of that information at each of the stations. And then we also have a page on reflection resources. So these are different books and movies, documentaries in particular, that might serve as resources in preparation for hosting a simulation or afterwards in whatever way you see fit. But again, just some additional resources that might help in the planning process. And just a couple more pictures. So this is the sample identity card I wanted to share. So what you have is just the name and nationality and current location of a real refugee and a brief story about their circumstance. And so these are real stories of real JRS beneficiaries, individuals that we work with through our programs. So you'll see on the right what happens at that entry border station is the participant will receive a card. The person manning the station can fill out the right side of the card, and again, they take the card with them. And actually, as the simulation progresses, it's really fascinating to see how some of the participants take on that persona of the refugee. They absorb, even as brief as it is, they really absorb the story. They begin to identify with it and carry that through with them throughout the simulation itself. So it can be very powerful. And this photo on the left is one example of our posters, our station signs. So again, this is available on our website where you can download it and print it out and have one at each of the stations. So this is the one we have for the entry border station. And then photo on the right is a screenshot of our action page on our website where you can go and click on our latest actions to send a letter to your policymaker. Now, I mentioned that a couple of our schools have had some great success in generating some media interest in their simulations. So these are actually both Fairfield and Scranton were able to get some news stories. And so the one I'd like to show you is actually the one from Scranton. So let me just move over to that. And I'll play it for you. It's just a couple minutes long. This, again, is a news story from the local news station in Scranton about their refugee simulation about a year ago.
Since this subject has everyone talking, one thing many of us can't comprehend is the plight of refugees themselves. Some students came together today to gain a unique perspective. The University of Scranton put on a program that gave students a chance to experience what it's like to be a refugee. Eyewitness News reporter Kelly Cho takes us there.
This isn't a real refugee camp, but it certainly feels like one. Students at the University of Scranton traded in their backpacks for ID badges.
It's one thing to look at pictures or read about something, but actually standing in a simulated environment like this is a whole different ballgame.
The journey begins behind this orange fence, where the students are assigned the identity of a refugee and all of the struggles that come with it.
He was talking about how a mortar could be dropped anywhere at any time in Syria. So him leaving for work, that could be the last time he ever sees his daughter again.
From there, the refugees are given a small bowl of rice and beans, maybe a few pieces of broccoli, and a 5-gallon water jug.
I definitely struggled a little bit. I could not imagine having to carry that for miles when I had trouble doing 5 feet maybe.
One of the most eye-opening parts of the experience is crawling underneath this makeshift shelter. The refugees are lucky if they have a blanket to keep warm, and they may have to share this small space with up to 10 other people.
I was in there with 2 other people, and we were already kind of crammed. But like living there, that's way too much.
The last station gives students an opportunity to ask their politicians to help refugees start a new life in northeastern Pennsylvania.
I take away that the lives of the refugees are definitely a lot harder than ours, and that I definitely want to help in any way I can.
In Scranton, Kelly Cho, Eyewitness News.
Now, this is the first time the University of Scranton hosted the refugee simulation, but organizers say they hope to make it an annual event.
Oops, sorry. That's really one more slide, just to show you a couple other media hits. This was actually a non-Jesuit university. The University of Central Florida was able to host a simulation last year as well, and then the photo on the right is a screenshot of their promotional efforts on their website regarding the simulation. So we were happy to see that this, again, caught the interest of a variety of partners, and we hope to continue to spread the word. So that really wraps up the presentation. I'm happy to take questions. I think Tim will facilitate. But thank you again for everyone who took the time to join us today. We really appreciate it, and again, happy to answer any questions.
So as we move here towards the close of our 30 minutes, I rush to say thank you to Giulia, but for those of you who have questions, you can raise your hand within GoToWebinar and we'll turn your microphone on. You can submit questions in the questions panel. Each of you are on maybe a little different interface, but we'll take the next few minutes to attend to those questions and answers, and we'll keep this recording until then. Sean Hessian, your microphone is on now. Sean, you muted yourself, Sean. There you go.
I'm sorry. Giulia, is the simulation intended for college students, high school students, or is it really applicable for either one?
Either one and more, I would say, Sean. I mean, the examples I gave you just happen to be university level because those are some of the recent examples that we have, but I know of a few Jesuit high schools who are considering hosting simulations now and hoping to plan them for this coming spring. But absolutely, I mean, you just seeing what it looks like and how it plays out, it could take place in any real community setting. It'd be in a parish setting. We actually do have a parish in North Carolina who's planning one for this March. So absolutely, it's really open to anyone.
And what kind of lead time do you think it takes to effectively organize and plan and be able to properly execute it?
That's a good question. I think at least a month probably. One, to give yourselves enough time to publicize it, especially if it's if you're attracting a wide audience, a large audience. If it's happening in a smaller setting, maybe a regular group meeting, for example, that might not be necessary if you're just building it into something that's pre-existing, something that's already scheduled. So that's one consideration. Another consideration is how many people are involved in the planning process. So giving folks enough time to get up to speed on the issues to prepare. So I would say at least a month, but again, give or take depending on your context.
Thank you.
Sure.
Thanks, Sean. Tom, go ahead. You're unmuted. Unmute yourself if you have to. Go ahead, Tom.
Okay, thank you. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. My question is mostly logistical. What is like an ideal number? We have a school of 1,000 students. What's an ideal number for running this program?
For the planning committee, you mean?
No, for
participating
participants. Like, could you run 1,000 people through it?
Right. I mean, I think it depends on, you could do it a couple of different ways. You could split it up into 2 groups so that you host it for half of so about 500 one time, 500 for the other, or you just extend the amount of time, so you run it for an afternoon, for example, and have groups of students come in throughout the afternoon. So there's a couple different ways you can configure it, but it's definitely manageable. If you think about that 10 to 20 minute time frame, then just sort of backtrack from that to see how long it might take to get a certain number of students through. Each group that comes in, we suggest typically no more than 5 students in each group that starts, and then they make their way to each station. And then typically some of the organizers are floating to make sure that people are moving along in a timely manner. Again, some of those conversations might last a little longer, so you might have some more flexibility, but if you really need to keep things moving, then you might have to be proactive in making that happen. So it absolutely, it can happen. I think if you have enough time that you can devote to maybe an afternoon for 1,000 kids, to be able to get everyone through and not feel too rushed.
Okay, and organizational staff? How many?
Right, so I would say at least one person, a lead on each of the stations, so that's 7 stations. Probably 2 people if you're thinking of a large number, so if people need to swap out, and that you give them a little bit of a break. And then at least a couple people to help oversee the entire program. So that brings you to, it could be 10 to 20 people maybe planning it depending on how large, but I would say at least 10 probably.
Okay, thank you.
Yep.
Cappy, did that answer your question?
Yes, I think that did answer my question.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
All right. Jeff Sullivan, you have a question. Your microphone is on if you wish. Go ahead. Okay, Jeff, we can't hear you, but your question is, Jeff has asked what other activities besides the simulation are you familiar with schools or organizations using to create the awareness? Are you familiar with any, Giulia?
Sure. So other things that schools are doing, I mentioned the panel discussions that sometimes take place in conjunction with the simulation or other times are standalone events. So we've had a number of partners host panel discussions or a lecture, a talk about these issues. We've actually spoken at a number of schools and continue to schedule more talks around the country. So if that's something you're interested in particular, having JRS come to your campus or to your community to talk about this, that's certainly an option. Feel free to be in touch with me about that. So things like screenings of documentaries, if you want to take a look at once you have access to the toolkit, I have, again, a list of some of the documentaries that relate to these issues. That might be something you can do to screen a documentary and have a brief discussion afterwards. Some groups also volunteer locally. If you happen to have a local refugee resettlement agency, and I think we actually have one on the phone today participating, that is something that some students certainly have been doing and being able to volunteer locally. So those are just a few ideas of other things you can do.
Good. Ryan, go ahead.
Hi, could you provide email addresses of contacts at Scranton or Fairfield who could provide us with their insights and ideas about best practices? Thank you.
Absolutely. If you want to be in touch with me, so my email's on the screen right now. If you want to be in touch with me directly about that, I'm happy to make an introduction. We've done that already a couple of times, and they're happy to share some of their firsthand experience about this. So absolutely, if you want to just send me a note about that, I'm happy to do it.
Okay, great. Thank you very much.
Okay.
Okay, Wendy, if you unmute yourself, we can hear you.
Okay, yes. Hi, this is Andre. I'm here with Wendy. The question we had for you was, have you ever had an experience one of these schools have actual refugees witness the experience, and if so, also had their thoughts on how valid or how close to their experience it was, to give feedback on it?
It's a good question. I don't think we've made a concerted effort to do that specifically. I mean, certainly our work is grounded in our firsthand experience of working with refugees. So, so many of us at JRS, have been in these contexts, have seen this firsthand. So that helped inform the simulation itself, because we operate in these settings and do a lot of this work. That's certainly, part and parcel of how we devise the simulation. Whether or not we've actually shared the toolkit with a refugee directly. That hasn't quite happened, but I'll say that what we have done in certain circumstances is involved a resettled refugee, so someone who's living in the U.S., who was a former refugee but is now living in the U.S. In some of these programs. In some instances, they've come and spoken at either a simulation or a panel as a part of a panel discussion, or even as part of a JRS talk that we've given on campus. Not only has JRS spoken, but we've been able to bring, or the organizers have been able to bring, a resettled refugee in to share their firsthand experience. So in that way, certainly, you know, the impact of hearing firsthand from someone who's experienced this is very powerful. So if that's something that you're interested in, I would certainly give it some thought. I hope that's helpful.
Yes, thank you.
Great.
Great.
Jeff Sullivan also wants to know, given an estimation space size, Loyola Academy is looking to have about 40 to 50 students in a 45-minute class period.
Right. That's certainly doable. I think when we've had to do this in a compressed physical space, what we've had to do sometimes is combine stations, for example, or take out some of the stations. Maybe instead of 7, the full 7, just do 4 or 5, or again combine them. So that's absolutely up to the organizers, whatever you can physically sort of set up. But that's absolutely something you can do. Just, push all the tables, the desks aside, create some space around the room, and in a class period, you can certainly, for about 40, 50 students, that's absolutely doable. What I'll mention too, though, is if anyone is interested in, planning on hosting a simulation, interested in doing it, we're happy to speak with you directly as well. Again, my info is on the screen, and what we do often is have a phone call with organizers ahead of time as they're thinking through some of these logistics, and helping them, plan what it might look like, and certainly putting you guys in touch with folks at other schools that have hosted is helpful, but we're happy to walk you through some of those logistics as well.
Good. Anyone else here as we move to 4:43 Eastern Time? Any final questions for Giulia before we bring things to a close? Raise a hand or submit a question in the question pane, and we'll tend to it. Okay. Timothy, unmute yourself and we can hear you.
Oh, yeah, thanks. I was just wondering, if the stations are sequential, where to have a staggered start might be preferable, so you don't have a bunching up at the beginning. If that's kind of a preferable way to do it.
Yeah, we've done that as well. It depends on, again, on the size of the group. If it's a really big group, we've had that where we've had everyone start at the border station to get their card, but then the second station might be different. Some might go on to water, some might go on to shelter, and then they just need to keep track of, where they've been, and that's where some of the floaters can help in directing people to where they need to go. So absolutely, in the case of large groups, we've had to do that.
Okay, thanks.
Yes,
thank you, Tim. Any last questions? Thank you, everybody, for your willingness to set aside a part of your day. I know you have nothing else going on, so probably nothing but idle time otherwise. But thank you, and most importantly, to Giulia McPherson for coming down 3 floors, for Bill Hobbs for hosting her in our headquarters. Please do have a good rest of your day, a good week. We'll follow up with an email tomorrow afternoon and help us spread the word both about Hemispheres and the JRS and the walk a mile in their shoes. It's important, okay? Thanks, everybody. We're going to draw to a close now so you can sign off. Appreciate it.
Thanks, everyone. Thank you, Tim.